How's it going, Browns fans? Welcome in to another X's and Dogs podcast. Today is December 5th, once again entering week 14 of the NFL season. Normally, I stick to like 2 podcasts a week, so this is a little bit of a bonus podcast for you guys, but there was some rather interesting news that came out, regarding the Browns head coach, Kevin Stefanski. And there's also kind of an interesting situation building in Tennessee that I want to get to as well, that actually really has nothing to do with the fact that we do play the Titans this week. So kind of unrelated to the game itself. In fact, both of the topics for today's podcast are really unrelated to the game this Sunday. More macro type situations that are just kind of interesting talking points that I want to address, and I didn't really think I would have the opportunity to address those, in the post-game reaction pod or really into next week much at all. So that said, an eventful day in the sports world overall for all of the soccer, aka football fans out there. I myself am a big soccer fan, so we, of course, did get the USMNT's group draw today, which, in summary, pretty favorable. If you're a world soccer fan, a world football fan, I think you'd probably agree with me that that's a pretty good draw for the USMNT. This is a Browns podcast. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but an exciting time with the World Cup starting here in the U.S. soil coming up in the summer of 2026. So I wanted to just touch on that. And if you guys have any thoughts, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. But overall, a very favorable draw for the U.S., and I can't wait for the World Cup to start this coming summer. That's all I wanted to say about that. And now we can move into the main topic for today's podcast, which is the main reason why I decided to make this podcast. So we got the article that came out, I believe early yesterday, regarding Kevin Stefanski, made by Jeremy Fowler. And if you don't know Jeremy Fowler, he's a very in touch, very reputable source for NFL news. So he made a report about Kevin Stefanski, kind of going into detail about how Kevin will not have a hard time finding another coaching job, assuming he does get released from the Browns. And this is something that to me is not very surprising. As a pretty in touch Browns fan with, hearing a lot of podcasts, hearing a lot of the in tune Browns beat or Browns analyst reporters talking about the topic of Kevin Stefanski, it was always going to be the situation where he's more than likely going to be able to find another job pretty quickly. That's something I knew, and I think most Browns fans probably have known for a while. And ultimately, I just want to start the conversation by giving my thoughts on that, and then kind of building into how it kind of relates to maybe the Browns' plans and how that situation as a whole should affect the 2026 offseason. So to start, Kevin Stefanski is a 2-time Coach of the Year. He's a guy who has had success in Cleveland, Ohio for the Browns, which that in and of itself is impressive to a wide portion of the NFL, tree. Like most owners, GMs will find that impressive. They truly believe that, any Browns head coach is really handicapped with the Haslams being the owners, just kind of a deep, rich history of bad football here in Cleveland. And that's a real thing that owners, GMs, the top minds across the league really have an understanding of. And knowing that, being able to have a couple playoff seasons, a couple winning seasons, being solid in some seasons apart from that, although from the Browns fans' perspective, a number of disappointing seasons also, but looking at it from the outside, a couple winning seasons, 2 Coach of the Year awards, playoffs in Cleveland is just something that hasn't happened for decades and decades, and that in and of itself is more than likely going to be enough for Kevin Stefanski to get another opportunity, another shot at being a head coach, or at the very minimum, an offensive coordinator for another NFL team. Having said that, I want to make the point that that idea and that reality should not at all affect the Browns' decision in whether or not they decide to bring Kevin Stefanski back next year, regardless of however that may make Jimmy Haslam feel, Andrew Berry feel. The fact that Kevin could go out there and get another job pretty quickly, more than likely, I believe Kevin will find success elsewhere in the NFL, because if he has been able to do it in Cleveland, he's more than likely going to be able to do it elsewhere. Those things, though, are not reasons to keep a coach. Sometimes good coaches just run out of their voice runs stale. The pull they have in the locker room, the I don't want to say the respect, but kind of the overall betterment they do for an organization kind of runs out. It has nothing to do with their ability to be a good coach. It's time to move on from them at times. And I think there are, like I said, a number of examples of that throughout the NFL for Hall of Fame coaches even. You look at Andy Reid, coached in Philadelphia, had plenty of success, was eventually run out of town, and we now know Andy Reid is one of the best coaches of all time. There's numerous other occasions. Tony Dungy, coached for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, was always looking for a Super Bowl there, had hyper competitive teams, and gets once again run out of town in Tampa Bay. His voice ran dry there. One of the best coaches of all time, goes to Indianapolis, wins a Super Bowl with Peyton Manning and the Colts, and that is something that does happen in this league. And I think, I'm not saying that Kevin's going to go win a Super Bowl anywhere, but I'm saying that more than likely he will be able to find more success in this league. But there comes a time where it is time to make a change for the locker room, for the betterment of the organization, and to just freshen things up for a young team who needs a change overall in that building. So that's kind of where I think the situation is at with Kevin. I've been open about that. I think Kevin's a good coach. If in my ideal world, this whole situation didn't happen and Kevin was able to keep this team competitive and make it to the playoffs more often. But in reality, the Deshaun Watson trade completely wrecked this franchise, wrecked Kevin Stefanski's real chance to salvage anything, and build anything here in Cleveland. And he deserves some blame for that, because he was the head coach who decided to move on. And probably, I want to reiterate the fact that probably he was not the only one to make this decision, but he definitely played a role in the decision. Regardless, I think he definitely had a say to bring Deshaun in, get rid of Baker, and completely go through an organizational shift in that way. And so somebody's got to hold the water for that, especially whenever you follow that up with having back-to-back, more than likely back-to-back sub-5-win seasons. Who knows how the end of this year is going to shake out, but ultimately, the idea here is that I think both parties will truly benefit from moving on here in Cleveland onto the Browns. I think Kevin can go somewhere else and find success. There will be teams, there will be good organizations looking for new head coaches. If not this year, probably next year. The Steelers, the Ravens, the Bengals probably. I know that's not a great organization, but they have Joe Burrow. So, like, imagine Kevin Stefanski goes to Cincinnati with Joe Burrow, and we have to play them 2 times a year. It's food for thought as Browns fans. That might suck. I could definitely see him having some success over there in Cincinnati with a quarterback like that. But again, when you look at it from the Browns' perspective, we need a new voice in that locker room desperately. We probably needed one this year. It was probably the right time to move on from Kevin after last season. But for a guy who built up enough cachet, they just weren't able to make that decision. And it's time this year for sure. Albeit we don't know how exactly the head coach market's going to shape out. We don't exactly know who's gonna shake free from their current spots. Could Mike Tomlin, be a guy who comes free? I talked about it in my last podcast, but I would sign Mike Tomlin the same day that the Steelers released him if I was the Browns. Same thing with John Harbaugh. I'm also a big Brian Flores fan. There's guys out there that I do believe could really step in and create a better culture here in Cleveland than Kevin was able to create. And I think Kevin will be a better coach after his time here in Cleveland. So ultimately, this report from Jeremy Fowler, to me, was released at a very strategic time. And it is simply because more than likely Kevin will not be able to survive back-to-back dreadful seasons, regardless of how good the draft was in 2025, regardless of the fact that he hasn't had any good quarterback play, regardless of the fact that they've been, completely limited with their cap situation. You still, as a head coach in the NFL, you only have but a very, 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 very slim margin for error, or very, very slim understanding of excuses or reasons. You have to eventually just win. And Kevin hasn't been able to do that, and he more than likely will face the situation of being released from the Browns, and I think it'll more than likely be come off as a mutual agreement, like both parties agreed that it's time to move on. And ultimately, that's my takeaway from this article by Jeremy. I'm sure the Stefanski camp, if you will, strategically had this article, somewhat released during a time frame where teams are going to start to think about a new head coach as the season comes to an end here in a collection of weeks. So that's kind of my thoughts on the Kevin Stefanski situation, specifically regarding that article by Jeremy Fowler that came out yesterday. I'm curious to know what you guys think about that situation, that article. Was it just a random article that was released? I find that hard to believe, but let me know what you guys think. The next thing I want to talk about is a super hypothetical situation. It's kind of a fun topic to talk about here on a Friday as we, enter a nearly, I don't want to say NFL games are ever meaningless, but as it pertains to anything this season, neither of these teams have any real benefit from winning this game. So the only true meaning that will come out of this is likely for the team that loses it. So that said, in a week like this, I think it's fun to talk about some potentially hypothetical topics. And there was some buzz on X, aka Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And look, I want to preface this right now by saying I have not been able to find any reputable source, reputable reporter talking or making a statement on this situation. So this is purely me just talking about this topic for the fun of it as a Browns fan. There were some rumblings on Twitter, and who knows, like there's a whole broad spectrum of reliability, and who knows what the actual situation is inside of the Tennessee building. But there was a report that potentially the Titans would be open and the door would not be closed to drafting another quarterback in the 2026 draft, which for a team who has the number 1 overall pick, I guess I have to say off the bat that it would behoove them to be open to doing so, but it would also behoove them to, portray that they are open to doing so. Because, of course, we all know that teams are going to be potentially trading with them if they land the number 1 pick to go out there and get Fernando Mendoza, Dante Moore, Ty Simpson, who knows? There's going to be a fierce market for one of these quarterbacks coming out in 2026, and the more Tennessee can convince people that they are truly interested, the better position they will be in to get more capital in return. So I wanted to just start by saying that there's a good chance it's a smokescreen. It could totally be a smokescreen, but also there is a chance that maybe they just think that Fernando Mendoza is leaps and bounds better. Like, let's say, hypothetically, Fernando Mendoza throws 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and they beat Ohio State this weekend. You're the Tennessee Titans. You go and now lose to the Browns on Sunday. You almost lock up a first overall spot. I think they still have to play the Saints, so that'll be a big game for them. But you have now a very, very good chance to get that first overall pick. And you have the opportunity to just say, screw it, we're going to take Fernando Mendoza. This guy's better than Cam Ward. We want him. Let's just take him. I don't think that's wild to say at this point. Could we get to a point in time if Mendoza doesn't play as well here in to wrap up the season? Cam Ward starts to turn it on a little bit. That situation is just not realistic. Of course, that's definitely on the table as well. But to say that there's no chance that Mendoza is just in Tennessee's eyes better than Cam Ward, I think saying there's no chance of that is unrealistic. It definitely could happen. And I just want to start by kind of talking about Cam Ward's season. Ultimately, Cam Ward has been put in a horrible situation in Tennessee. I would argue the situation in Tennessee is one of the worst that I have seen a rookie quarterback drafted early being put into in a long, long time. Like, that is a terrible situation. He is getting very little to no help whatsoever. As I'm seeing some latency on my camera here, so I apologize about that. But ultimately, yeah, statistically, Cam Ward's also having just a very below average season. He's a rookie. It happens. He might be better than he's showing. He could grow exponentially next season. But he's having a bad year. You can't really sugarcoat it accurately. Yeah, he's just not having a great season. And like I said, let's say Mendoza goes crazy here. Indiana makes it deep in the playoffs. Mendoza looks like that no doubt first overall pick, Heisman winner. Let's say the Titans decide, you know what, we're gonna trade Cam Ward because there's still that what if with him. No doubt. He has arm talent. He has physical abilities. Big dude, can sit in the pocket, throw the ball as well as most guys in the NFL. Better than most guys in the NFL. There's going to be teams that are willing to pay a pretty penny for him, I believe. And my topic today is, would the Browns be a team to consider maybe just saying, hey, let's not draft a quarterback. Let's go out there and get the best quarterback in last year's draft, because the Titans are going to give up on, as my teams is going crazy here. Let me turn the sound off. So let's say they decide to trade Cam Ward. The Browns are interested. I want to first start by how much I would be willing to give up for the best quarterback potentially in last year's draft class, the number 1 overall pick in 2025. For me, I would start with maybe next year's first round pick. If the Titans are like, no, we want people in this year's draft, or we want picks in this year's draft, I would start with a second round pick from 2026. You know, to me, getting Cam Ward for a second round pick sounds very intriguing. You know, we still have 2 first round picks. Let's say we're able to get Cam Ward with a second round pick, and then maybe a collection of third round picks from the 2027 or 2028, maybe some later round picks thrown in there as well. To me, that sounds like an accurate package, like a realistic package for a retread quarterback who had a pretty bad year in year 1. I think it's going to be really hard for them to get a first rounder off anybody, even knowing how bad that Titans team was. I still think it's going to be really hard because he's put on some questionable tape, although there's some highs, there's definitely some lows in there as well. So let's say the Browns are able to get Cam Ward with a second round pick this year. We can go out there now. We can, all of you Carnell Tate fans, we get our hands on Carnell Tate with whatever pick we have. What is it? Maybe the 7th pick overall. Maybe it's the 10th pick overall. And then now we still have Jacksonville's pick, which more than likely is going to be in the 20s. We take, in my opinion, some sort of offensive line help. A tackle for sure would be at the top of my list there. And you could swap those. Like if there's a tackle that you think is better in to take early in the draft, because maybe Carnell goes like 5th overall and we can't get him, feel free to swap those. We walk out of the first round with a tackle, a wide receiver. Now we have our second round picks being used on Cam Ward. So we have the quarterback come in who can make all the throws. We're going to need to have a good coach with him to start to kind of get some of the bad habits out of him. But he's going to have a very talented wide receiver core with Carnell Tate, Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, who I believe could be a good wide receiver 3. He's just being relied on too much now as like a wide receiver 2. We have Harold Fannin. We have Quinshon Judkins. The offensive line now has DeJuan Jones coming back, maybe shifting him back to right tackle, where he was much more successful. We have a young first-round talent at the other tackle position. We start to throw, maybe Zach Zinter. The guard position is going to be a little rough. Maybe we invest some capital in that position in the 3rd round. Maybe we go out there and get a free agent. We have Luke Whippler, who has shown real flashes, real potential at the center position, or maybe they throw him elsewhere. But to me, center position. I think that offense right there would be, and I know this is a crazy hypothetical. We're getting really, there's a lot of ifs out there at this point, but to me, that is best case as a Browns fan. If I could sign up for that right now, I would do it. Skip the next, whatever it is, 8 months. Don't even, just do that. Don't even worry about the next 8 months. Move into next season. I guarantee you that offense will be much better than what we've seen over the past few years, and something to be really excited about as Browns fans. Yeah, it's just a fun hypothetical. I'm very intrigued about that situation in Tennessee, and I think one key factor in the realistic ability for this to happen is Fernando Mendoza and how he can perform to end the year, because if he does have a Joe Burrow-like playoff stretch where he's just undeniable, and you never know, he could. Like, he's playing really well. The team's undefeated. It's a good Indiana team. If he's able to do that, I think then we start to really have these conversations about Cam Ward. And all I'm saying is, if the Browns play themselves out of the top whatever 7 picks and don't really have a chance to get one of the 3 guys that a lot of people are saying are first round picks, which may dwindle down to 2 depending on who decides to declare. All I'm saying is that doesn't sound like a bad route to me to give Cam Ward a shot. The Saints used a second round pick on Tyler Shuck last year. So, and he's looked okay. Like, this is not a hate on Tyler Shook podcast. Like, he's looked pretty good, and who knows what he'll turn into. But I'm just saying, a second round pick is not the same as a first round pick. You can risk those a little bit more. So, an interesting thing to keep in mind if you're a Browns fan as we wrap up the season here, just to add another wrinkle on top of what's going to be an interesting quarterback situation here in Cleveland, Ohio. And that's not even mentioning, I didn't even bring up Shedeur one time in this video. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think about this situation. Do you think that's realistic? Do you think that Tennessee's just maybe releasing some sort of rumors as like a smokescreen type of thing? Let me know. Let me know in the comments. Some food for thought, a fun topic for a Friday podcast, a bonus Friday podcast for you guys. But that's all I have for today's pod. As always, enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the games, a great slate like I talked about in the last podcast of college football games coming up. So we all get to enjoy that on Saturday, and then we get to watch the Browns hopefully get a win on Sunday. Who knows? But yeah, enjoy the games. Nonetheless, enjoy your weekend. Take it easy, everyone, and I will see you all in the next podcast. Bye-bye.